So, I've never actually experienced anything out of the ordinary when it comes to the paranormal or otherworldly happenings, but I do believe in it. Very much so, in fact. And I never thought anything like this would ever happen to me. And even if I did encounter something for the first time, that it just wouldn't be anything like this. I'm 23, female, and pretty much the only one in my family who hasn't seen or heard anything according to the topic. But this, what I'm about to tell you, I just cannot explain. So I recently moved to the southwest of the US and decided to rent a room in a nice home that I found up on a hill, really nice view, and the rent was just ridiculously cheap. So I thought, man, this is a steal, I'll take it. I met my roommates, got comfortable, settled in just fine, and everything was great, right? A couple of months passed by, and I didn't think the house was too scary, considering that the house was just generally abnormally dark despite the time of day it is, and I never felt a bad vibe or pretty much anything. For reference, I live in a 2-story house, but it's kind of the opposite of what you'd think. When you walk in the front door, you get to the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, the dining room area, and you have to go downstairs to get to me and my roommate's bedrooms. I should also mention that there were no windows in the hall downstairs and no lights at the time. Now, it was roughly about 5 or 6 p.m. I think that day, and I'd just come home from work. Sometimes I happened to arrive first, hence being home alone for quite some time too. My roommates get home at sporadic times, so I never know when they'll come for sure. Well, I was upstairs in the kitchen preparing something to eat for dinner on the counter while just watching some Top 5's YouTube videos when I swear I heard some faint footsteps ascending up the stairs in a really slow way. And I mean really slow too. Like, way too slow to be human. Every creak on the stairs was just really elongated, and it didn't help that I was watching these creepy-ass videos already, so I was pretty freaked out, and I like to admit. So I paused my video to listen closer to the steps, and I tried remembering if I'd seen any of my roommates' cars in the driveway or anything, but because I'm so used to my routine, I kind of just cancelled out being aware of my surroundings, and I just couldn't remember. Now, with the way the counter in the kitchen is set up, I only have to turn my head to the left to see the first few steps descending downstairs and into the living room and the bathroom. I kept my eyes on those first few steps, just waiting to see which one of my roommates it was so I can stop being scared. The steps continued until the head of this thing pops out. I couldn't see past their neck because they never fully came up the first floor, and it was as if they stopped midway, only to see who was in the kitchen. And this part is the one that I just can't explain, and I think about it all the time. As soon as this thing's head comes into view, I notice that its face is just pitch black, like a void. I could tell that there were no features, no nose, no eyebrows, and no cheekbones, just nothing. Mind you, the kitchen light was on, and I still couldn't see anything apart from actual eyes. It saw me, and for a brief moment, it made eye contact with me too. Its eyes opened so wide, and it made this kind of smile. It's kind of hard to describe what this smile was like because, obviously, I couldn't see anything but its eyes, but you know how if you wear like a stocking over your head or something like that, you can't really see the mouth anymore, but you can kind of still see the imprint from where someone would be smiling? Well, that was what this was like. And quite honestly, I just froze. My mind just drew a complete blank, and I surprisingly didn't feel much, only shock, and the thing was just looking at me, still smiling. I remember thinking, what the hell is that? And it turned around and made its way downstairs as slow as it did before. Only once it reached downstairs, I didn't hear any doors open or close, indicating that it was one of my roommates. The whole thing took only about 5 minutes, but it felt like a lot longer, and I didn't know what to think, and so I called the cops, and nothing ever came from it. All I can speculate is that I felt like it was letting me know that it was there and that it always will be. After that, I refused to go downstairs until my roommates got home as well, and I stayed in the living room just feeling paranoid at every little sound. But I was not about to go and check it out. No way in hell. I mean, I didn't know what it was going to do to me, if it would do anything at all. But after seeing this, I gotta say, though, that to those that do the chasing after things like this, you guys have some real balls, man, and you've earned my full respect. And 2 years later, I still have never seen anything like that since then. So I was working in a large assisted living facility for a few years. I absolutely loved my job too, and I worked with the elderly mostly, but I'd become a highly requested assistant and got moved around to the dementia ward, the short-term rehab ward, the stroke ward, just all over the place. Being a people person, I loved it. I like going the extra mile in my job and getting to know my patients and their families on a more personal level. I felt like it made a better CNA of me, and it wasn't uncommon for me to be assigned to the more difficult patients because I could typically handle them no problem. So, it was a regular day. My charge nurse had mentioned that we'd be getting a few new admits, and I didn't think much of it. Everything went routinely, and we got them all settled into their rooms and stuff, but one patient in particular was already being a handful and tried to escape a few times, so we needed to move him to the secured unit. I could hear him yelling and cussing out everyone, telling them that they were idiots and that it was unnecessary to be doing all this. A few of the nurses suggested I go try to calm him down, so, of course, I said yes. I put on my most charming smile and waltzed on over asking him what was wrong. He immediately took a liking to me and calmed down. He told me that nobody there knew how to do their job and he wanted some food already. I told him that dinner would be served soon and I'd make sure to bring his tray to him. He cooperated with everyone as long as I was around and took his meds and took a shower, settled into bed no problem. Once my shift was over though, he started acting up again and ended up needing one-on-one supervision. Different staff members would just take turns monitoring him and eventually I had to as well. It was an easy day's work though. Get him his ice cream here and there, watch some TV. I didn't mind at all. He told me about his old life and asked about mine, and mostly if I liked what I do and how come I never worked in the secured unit. I told him that I usually had my own group of patients in the front that I had to look after, but I'd make an effort to drop in and see him when I could. At first, the rest of the staff thought it was great. They would call for me if he started acting out, and everything was fine. But then he started to get a little too attached. He started saying that he wouldn't do anything unless I was there at all times, which, of course, I couldn't do since I was needed elsewhere. While I did float to different wards, the security unit was one of the ones I spent the least amount of time in. He started getting mad at me, saying that I needed to make more of an effort to see him and that I wasn't trying hard enough. I explained to him that technically he wasn't my patient and I couldn't spend my entire work shift just hanging out with him. And that's when things started getting really bad. He started lashing out, yelling and screaming at everyone. He was becoming violent with not only the staff but other patients. He was just a complete liability. I had to drop something off in the secured unit one day too, and one of the other CNAs told me that he was asking for me. So I popped my head in and he started saying things like, "There's my girl." I felt uneasy about this, but I remained calm on the outside. If he was in a good mood, then I didn't want to be the one to ruin it for everyone else, right? He gave me a huge hug and a kiss on my cheek, and it immediately made me feel a bit queasy. I kind of laughed it off, though, and got myself out of there as quickly as possible, and after that, I avoided the secured unit pretty much at all costs. He started telling the nurses that he wanted only me to take care of him, and when they said that that wasn't possible, because that wasn't my ward, he started going to my bosses and the heads of the facility saying that he only wanted me to look after him. Luckily, my bosses had my back and told him that there was no way that I could be assigned back there due to my high demand in the other wards. I mean, I was already running all over the place and the secured unit was completely out of my way. He didn't like hearing that, of course, and started threatening everyone, saying that we'd be sorry and this wasn't the end of this, and so on and so forth. My bosses called me into the office as soon as I walked into work the next day and explained that I wasn't allowed anywhere near that wing and to avoid any contact with him. Honestly, I had no problem with this and I just went about my day. but he would just start banging on the doors to the secured unit, demanding to be let out and saying that he needed to see me. My anxiety was through the roof at this point, and I had even called out a few times because I didn't want to see him. The facility was working fast to get him out of there because they had reason to believe that I could possibly be in danger with his violent behavior as well. And on top of all of that, it didn't help that some of the other staff members were whispering behind my back saying that I had let this all happen and I was always flirting with him and a bunch of other just really ugly things. Eventually, they got him discharged though, and I felt a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Other than people still talking about me behind my back, I felt like I could just get back to my job properly and get on with life. I didn't let the negative and disgusting comments change the way I treated my patients with open arms and an open heart, and things started to go back to normal. Or so I thought. On one of my days off, I got a call from my coworker. She told me that he had called the facility asking for me. She told him that I wasn't in for work that day, and he started to ask for my schedule. Now, I'd dealt with someone stalking me before, so I immediately started to shut down. She told me that she had already informed our boss and that I should go to the heads of the facility when I come back to work the next day, so I did. I expressed my feelings and told him that it made me nervous that he called for me, and the head of the facility's face just fell. She told me that it wasn't just the one time that he'd called. They were receiving phone calls non-stop from him asking when I'd be in, and that if they didn't tell him my schedule, that he was going to go over there himself to find out. We had to make a plan of action in case he did actually show up, and they even suggested changing me to a different shift time because, I worked mid-afternoon and evenings. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere by myself and had to be picked up and dropped off at work and all sorts of things. While I waited for my ride, I had to wait inside the building as well and have someone escort me in and out. The calls continued though, and finally they had to threaten legal action and had a huge meeting with the entire staff of the facility. I felt humiliated and just totally small, knowing all the whispers and snide comments would come flooding back. But luckily, I had a bit more support than hate. The calls eventually started to slow down, and my true friends at work stood up for me when I wasn't there to defend myself to the people who didn't believe me. I started to get back into my normal routine once again and started feeling like my old perky self. But then, one of my bosses called me into the office one day with a huge smile on her face, and she told me that he won't be bothering you anymore. He's in jail for violating parole. Obviously, I was over the moon. I felt like I could breathe again. My nightmare was finally coming to an end. But a month or so later, this is a while ago, so I can't remember exactly how long it took, but I was at work getting people ready for bed, and suddenly everyone started talking and whispering like crazy. My phone was ringing off the hook, so I finally took a call from one of my charge nurses, and she told me that the guy had been murdered in jail and to check out the article that she sent me. And I learned that he had an incredibly violent history, including child abuse, neglect, other unspeakable things, domestic abuse, robbery, a few other things too, and my bosses asked how I was feeling, and I told them that I couldn't say I was the least bit sad, and I wasn't surprised his temper and mouth got him into trouble, but man, this guy was really dangerous. I just had no idea this whole time that he was like this. I mean, sure, he was stalking me, and that was creepy, but other than that, I thought he was fairly harmless. Anyway, I've left that facility since then, and moved on to bigger things, and I sleep soundly at night knowing that someone like that can never bother anyone again. I was a senior in high school going through a rough time with school and home life as well. And my dad and I had a fight about one thing or another that just got blown out of proportion, and I went to stay at a house owned by some relatives who were not currently living there. The bedroom I stayed in was attached to a bathroom that had a door at the other end which opened into a small hallway connecting to the kitchen and living room and another bedroom. That night I got a bit of a strange feeling. It just felt heavy, I guess, and I felt afraid and just uncomfortable there. This was the house that I spent a good amount of time in and even stayed the night in before, albeit not alone. I just chalked it up to stress from everything that had been happening, and because being alone offered the first peace that I'd had for a while. I'm still not sure that that wasn't the case as well, but considering what happened in the morning, it may have been my subconscious warning me. So, I took a couple of Benadryl and I went to bed early that night. The feeling was still there when I woke up the next morning, and I was standing at the mirror in the bathroom just getting ready for school. That put the door into the hallway about 2 feet to my left, and that's when I heard a door slam at the other end of the house. I jumped, but my brain tried to reason that it was just the air conditioner kicking in or something along those lines. But then, I heard something running up the stairs. Loud, heavy footsteps. Definitely two-legged, definitely very large as well, but something was just really off about it. In my head, I kind of imagined something with really long legs because the amount of time between each step was quite big. It ran through the living room and the kitchen to directly outside of the bathroom, the whole time making this clicking noise that didn't sound the least bit human. It paused outside of the bathroom about 3 feet from me, cackled for several seconds, and then ran back to the other side of the house, slamming another door before running downstairs and slamming a final door. I was honestly terrified, and I was too afraid to look away from my reflection, scared that I would see something. Eventually, I gathered enough bravery to bolt out of the house, and I ran through the bedroom, grabbed my backpack, and just ran through the living room and out the front door without ever looking away from my target or processing anything in my peripheral. I have since blocked out a lot about the occurrence, and I can't remember all of it, but here's what I do remember. The noises it made just sent a chill down my spine that I never want to feel again. And something about the noises too just made me feel targeted. I knew that it was enjoying my fear somehow. Interestingly too, it definitely slammed the other doors it passed, but it didn't touch the bathroom door. It's like it knew that I was there, and everything about the experience just felt really personal. My belief is that whatever this thing was, and I do believe that it was demonic, just saw my weakness. I felt incredibly alone in the world at the time, and by only letting me hear it, I wasn't able to really confide in anyone. But no one understood the sheer terror because they couldn't understand what I heard. I know this is going to sound weird, but I felt like it was just trying to alienate me more. It was trying to make me weaker. When I realized that too was when I started kicking myself in the butt again and started focusing on the positives in my life. And after that, I've never had any other experience like it. Also, the house had been built within the last 20 years by another relative and had no dark past and no deaths. My parents actually moved into the house 2 years after this as well, and nothing else has ever happened. I've stayed there, even alone, several times since then, and I've never even felt the same heavy feeling again. The house has just simply felt very open and inviting. I don't know exactly what happened back then, but it's never left me. My father was somewhat of a skeptic in the paranormal. However, one of the few stories my dad would share about his childhood always stood out to me. So, he was born in Cambodia, and around age 14 is when he experienced what war was like. The Khmer Rouge, as described by my grandmother and parents, was ruthless. Often, families got separated, and because of that, my father's parents knew that they had to get my father out from what was going on. Now, there was one night when they were rudely awoken and someone was trying to get into the house. My father could hear his parents constantly shouting at him to just run so that he wouldn't have to see what was going to happen if he stuck around longer, so my dad told me that this was one of the hardest things he's ever had to do in his life, but he did it, and he ran from the thickest forest of Cambodia to make his way to Thailand. At about the halfway mark between Cambodia and Thailand, a few monks spotted my dad and asked him where he was heading by himself at this time of night. My dad, who understood Thai, told them about his situation, and so they decided to walk with my dad where they would take him in to get some food and whatnot. As you can imagine, the forest is pretty thick and the sound of gunfire is echoing throughout, so it was pretty scary. The monks would casually stop at times to pray because they'd find dead bodies, and my father was freaking terrified by that sight, and It was a lot for a kid to take in. As moments like this racked up, it felt like forever, my dad said, and the sun was barely breaking through the clouds, and my father heard a faint female voice in this pitch-black forest. He looked up at the monks and noticed that they started to chant and pray because they heard it too. My father decided to stand in amongst the monks because he was a little bit worried at this point. And this is the bit that my father had a really hard time explaining to us, but this is what he said. So, as the monks are chanting and praying, they noticed that there were some movements coming above them. The tree started to shake, and my father told me that he saw what he believed was a lady with just super long hair, kind of like the Grudge-looking lady. The monks decided to continue chanting, and the monks told my dad to not look at her or pay attention to her. They told him to chant and pray with them, so he did, not knowing any better, and as they started chanting louder, the trees around them started to shake violently. At this point, the monks told my dad to just run for it because the border of Thailand was just up ahead. And my father was like, "You don't have to ask me twice." But as he was running, the entire time he said that he knew that something was chasing him. He felt like something was nearly at his back, but was just out of reach. His feet were hurting, but he numbed out the pain from his feet and just continued running in fear. He said that it felt like an eternity, but he finally spotted some sunlight and pushed through the last few steps of the forest, and whatever was chasing him just stopped. And my father decided to turn around and take a look. He spotted the monks coming out, and he said that it kind of looked like they were fighting someone or something, like wrestling and pushing and kicking and shoving and whatnot. My dad asked the monks if they saw what he saw, and they said yes, and that they thought having him run ahead would keep whatever it was away from him. But they said that once my dad took off running, that this thing was actually chasing him the entire time. Like I said, my father is a huge skeptic. In fact, he's unwilling to say that this thing that was chasing him was actually a ghost or a demon or anything like that. But what he does stand by is the fact that this is actually a true story.